Take it out. Or you see tomorrow? Are you going to come in tomorrow to yoga? What? You going tomorrow? Maybe?
All right, feel free to move up and I think today's koan is a tiny bit esoteric, so hopefully it won't be too bizarre.
They're all neo-esoteric.
They are. I guess that's the nature of koans. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So I guess we're trying to have a little bit of winter still, a little bit of rain this week, and Yokoji had a little bit of snow. So I called up yesterday and asked, so they plowed the road and they're not expecting any snow, so when he wants to go up, they can. So today's koan, leaving speech and silence behind, or kind of like Aiken Roshi's definition, or the way he titles it. Oops, lost my page mark. Leaving behind equality and differentiation. It's a little bit more complicated, but I think it better defines what the terms that are used in the koan. So the main case, a monk asked Fuketsu in all earnestness, both speech and silence are concerned with Ri and me. How can we transcend them? Fuketsu said, I constantly think of Conan in March, where partridges are chirping about hundreds of fragrant blossoms. That sounds kind of out of left field. And notice that no one is supremely enlightened at the end of this one. So I think people. I'm sure that the monk was equally as confused as before he came in as he was when he went out. So Mumon's commentary: Fuketsu's activity of mind is like lightning. He gains the road and immediately walks along. But why does he rest upon the tip of the ancient one's tongue and not cut it off? If you realize this deeply, a way will be found naturally. Just leave all words behind and say one phrase. The verse. Fuketsu does not speak in his usual style. Before he says anything, it is already manifested. If you go on chattering glibly, you should be ashamed of yourself. So, lots of tiny little clues in the commentary and in the verse. So this Ri and me is actually a reference to what do they call it? A treatise that was written a couple hundred years before this. So this koan takes place sometime in the 10th century. So in the 5th century, the monk Sojo, or monk Joe, he was one of the 4 great translators. So it took a while for all the literature to get translated from Sanskrit or Pali, whatever was written into Chinese. So that took several hundred years before that happened. So in the 5th century, monk Joe was one of those translators who helped, further that, continue that translation. Because back then, number one, finding the written text was difficult. then getting it all the way from India to China, more difficult. Then translating it from Sanskrit to Chinese 3 times that difficulty. So it took a while. But he was one of the great translators. So he wrote this treatise called the Hozoran, which is the Japanese pronunciation. I'm not sure how to say it in Chinese, in which he talks about re and me. So the re is understood to mean what happened. We enter into re when we separate from the phenomenal world and enter into our inner world. And the re is when we come out of that inner world and come back to the phenomenal world. So this koan is about not making that separation, not separating our inner world from our outer world, and really understanding that they are one thing, relative and absolute in that sense, that they're 2 sides of the same coin. Koan. 2 sides of the same koan as well. There really is no separation between them. We experience them somewhat separately when we're sitting deeply in meditation and actually reach that state of samadhi. We have this really deep experience of oneness that is undisturbed by the phenomenal world. It gets dropped away. You're in this really deep silence within yourself and deeply at peace, even though you haven't physically left the world. You're still, your body's still in the world, still operating, but your entire being is in this state of samadhi that is sometimes difficult to come out of. There's a whole koan about even the bodhisattva not able to bring this woman who was deeply in samadhi. Manjushri, the greatest of all of the bodhisattvas, couldn't awaken this woman out of her samadhi. So they had to call in the devil. So the devil was able to bring her out. So why was this great being, Manjushri, not able to do it, but the devil was? So interesting contrast. So that very deep space of wholeness and samadhi and meditation is really what this re is you've taken the time not to be involved with the world. You're not out running business, you're not doing your work, you're sitting, you're doing zazen, you're doing deep meditation, and you've taken that kind of separation. And then when you come out of that, that's the re, and when you come out of that, you're once again dealing with business as usual. That's me. That differentiates. So this, in the way Zen works, is not separating those things at all. That inner peaceful, that place of space and peace and calm tranquility is still very much in operation, even when you're dealing with the phenomenal world. So you're leaving that separation behind. So that's kind of the extra layer of Zen work. Because yes, we do teach meditation. We do teach trying to get into that samadhi state. But then the next level of Zen is the work of bringing that state with you. When you get up off the cushion, you take that with you wherever you go, and you're always in that state, because that is your natural state. Your natural state is in this place of calm, tranquility, and equanimity. And then moving with that natural state and not clouding it over, because certainly I know that the way my brain works, it's very compartmentalized. I got my Kaiser mind, and I've got my home mind, and my cat mind, and my all these little separate compartments. And if something I got an email the other day, and I read it, and I realized I didn't understand it because it was not in the right compartment at the time that I was reading it, and then it just suddenly clicked into my right. I was like, oh, that's what that person was asking. So we have these separate ways of being, separate ways of operating, and we code switch. We speak differently at work. You speak differently in court, I imagine, than you do with at other times. So we all have this way of separating. And those different ways of being are not bad things. They're just the way we deal with reality. But can we be in those separate compartments and be one and be at peace, in equanimity, in balance with what is going on. Thus, why we sit in Zazen and go through what happens in Zazen. I was saying to Anthony just a minute ago that the peace and tranquility that Japanese tea ceremony exudes whenever you're in the tea room is a peace and tranquility that is wrought from the bowels of hell. There is just work that has to be done, and that looks like chaos. I mean, if you're ever there at a tea ceremony when we're doing these mass demonstrations, we're expecting 200 or 300 people at these demonstrations, because everything has to be done close to the last minute, and everyone knows that, and we're all trained on how to do that. It looks like a whole bunch of people running around with their heads cut off, taking their heads cut off, but it all comes together. And the minute that tea room is entered the tea room, all that stops, and there is this absolute perfect room in which tea and sweets and tea are served. And it is for those who are just coming to watch and just coming to be part of that tea ceremony. It is a transcendent experience. It's peaceful, it's calm, it's amazing. And that room has nothing in it except what is absolutely necessary to get that done. So that's the bringing of that separate world, that into the me, and having it function for a purpose. Hard to do, and it doesn't look like anything peaceful. And after you get used to it, and it took a long time for me to consider that to be fun, but now I do. It's actually fun to do, to put that together. But it takes work. It really requires that amount of focus and work to put into the practice to get rid of that separation, because otherwise it's like and I've heard younger Japanese tea ceremony people say this. It's like, oh, showtime, and they're on, and I'm like, oh, no, that's not it. So it's not theater. This life is not theater, even though we try to treat it that way. We get dressed up and we put on a role.
But I do the same thing when I go to court.
Yeah.
It's showtime.
Yes.
But it's not like I'm putting on a show. It's that now is the time for me to switch into that role.
Yeah.
But hopefully I'm still me in that role.
Yeah.
I'm bringing everything with me. But I do the same thing. I say it's
it's showtime.
Showtime.
Yeah, and it is. Certainly, unlike putting on a whole different character, like on stage, you're yourself, because you've practiced law for this long, so it's seamless for you. But you do know there are rules that are followed in the courtroom that are not followed outside the courtroom, and so there is that code switch that happens, and that's a natural thing. But hopefully, it's seamless for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I use the same phrase. It isn't necessarily I'm putting on a show. It's like I'm moving into that form. Yeah, that's a form for me.
Yeah. Just like this, doing Zazen is a form. Doing your service positions, that's a form. And those forms are not separate from the whole. That's what this is getting at. So, and his Fugetsu's response is just bizarre. When you first read this, it's like he said, how can we transcend this me and me? And Fugetsu says, Conan in March, those partridges just chirping away. And I'm sure the monk is like, what the really? Could I just get a straight answer? And what he doesn't realize is that is the answer. That is Fugetsu's answer. That's where he is. And so wherever it is you are is the answer. But that's hard for us to realize because we're in our heads and we're making up a story about where we are and what we're doing. But the experience of being in reality, just as it is, without trying to make it into something else. Usually by the time we're talking about reality, we're either complaining about it because we wanted it to be different, or we're describing it in ways that are just not real. So the being, where, he was remembering a time when he was completely engulfed in something that really wasn't Zen, that was just nature, that was just real. So that's the koan, is what's real? What is beyond this separation of samadhi and reality? Because there isn't one. We make up that there is one. We feel that there is one, because it's definitely some level of cognitive dissonance within ourselves for a while, until we go beyond that separation. So, and we have these, I won't go into too many details about the skandhas. The skandhas, there's a whole book on skandhas. We'll have to talk about that. We chat about it because one of the other translations of the Heart Sutra, Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva, it's in the second line. Which is conditions. That's what we use. So other translations, all the 5 skandhas. So the conditions are the realms within ourselves that allow us to perceive reality. And there are 5 of those realms. And then there are sub-realms of those realms. So it gets deep. So we'll go into that someday. But those skandhas allow us to perceive reality from different aspects. But those aspects don't separate reality. Reality is one seamless perception. But we're receiving it through hearing, seeing, touching, tasting, smelling. And oftentimes when we tell those stories, one or the other of those perceptions stand out for us. Oh man, that smelled bad, or God, that was really great music. We will tell it through the filter of one or the other of those perceptions, one of those senses, rather than as the whole. Because one thing stood out more than another, but they were all there at the same time. So even though, if I'm sitting in, Disney concert hall, listening to a piano recital, it's not just my ears that are hearing music, because I can see the performer on stage. I see the beautiful, 9-foot Steinway piano. I see the construction of the architecture, the beauty of the architecture of the building. I hear the stupid people opening a wrapper while in the middle of the quiet section because they're trying not to cough. Or if you're if you're at Hollywood Bowl in the quiet section, someone drops the bottle and it will all the way down to the front. And of course, that's what I remember. My reality of the Hollywood Bowl was that bottle. But the one or the other of these sense perception are not by themselves. They're one single whole, and you're perceiving it seamlessly. But how do you talk about that? How do you express that? How do you not just in words to other people, but within yourself? Because we're often making the separations within ourselves, and that's the separation that this koan is to help heal. Because that separation is not real. So the koans are always looking at reality from all these different aspects. How do we cause ourselves suffering, or how are we missing parts of the whole by how we tell the stories, or how we experience it? So, both speech and silence are concerned with we and me, and how can we transcend them? Excellent question. But if you try to actually explain that, you're not transcending which is what I just did. I just tried to explain it all to you. So thus the chattering glibly, as he says in the verse, Getsu does not speak in his usual style. No, because it appears like he's not answering the question. Before he says anything, it is already manifested. He's talking about something that was just there, just present. If you go on chattering glibly, blah, 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 this is that, this is this, this is that, this is this, all these explanations that we have of things, instead of experiencing intimately, directly reality just as it is, that's the shame. That's the shame. Not that it doesn't serve a purpose, nothing wrong with it, but it's not the only thing. It's certainly not the purpose of this practice. Appropriate if you're conducting a literature class and you're trying to explain how these things work together, what the history is, and how this all came. Then it works. But this picking and choosing, as Aiken Roshi points out in his explanation of this, is really intuitive. We know that what makes the way difficult is picking and choosing, and the great way is not naturally difficult. It's only difficult because we think it is. So stop thinking, because that's the problem. So the great way is not difficult. It just hates picking and choosing. So it's that picking and choosing and dissecting and explaining where it becomes difficult. Just sit, experience what's there. It's happening right here, right now. What hurts, what feels good, what smells good, what tastes good, what is not working well. So that's the intimacy. That's the intimacy that it's getting to. So it sounds like a tricky koan, but it really is very direct in some ways. So what's your experience of it? Reading me. Sure. A monk asked Fuketsu in all earnestness, both speech and silence are concerned with re and me. Let me read it from Aiken, because his a slightly different translation of it. A monk asked Fuketsu, speech and silence are concerned with equality and differentiation. So he doesn't use re and me, but equality and differentiation. How can I transcend equality and differentiation? Fuketsu said, I always think of Conan in March. Partridges chirp among the many fragrant flowers. Equality. Equality and differentiation. Yeah. Comments, questions, experiences? Was this just way off the wall? Completely indecipherable. Steve?
I guess for me, the experience would be exactly that experience. So I think that the experience itself, not trying to focus on the one thing,
Yeah.
to realize that they're
Yeah. Yeah. So which is exactly what you're doing in sitting. These discursive explanations come up in your brain, and you cut them off, bring them back to the breath, because that's the only thing you're doing. Just, sitting and breathing. That experience. Yeah.
For me, I think the gray area is the experiencing in the moment of my mind trying to describe the experience.
Yeah.
And so in sitting, it allowed us to breathe and note our thoughts, the experiences of our being, of our thoughts, our faculties. And the mind wanting to go to, oh, that was a negative thought. No, no, the experience.
Yeah.
And for me, it's most like prominent is when I'm sitting in a dentist chair, being present with the experience.
Yeah.
And I would say every time I leave the dentist's office, I have a dirty mouth. But in reality, I have a dirty mind because I'm saying so many bad words every time I'm experiencing the pain and the sensation. And then trying to be present of, oh yeah, that's pain. That's discomfort. My mind is irritated. Experience that. Note it. There's noting. And then there's justifying, and then there's adding on the experience. And so in sitting in meditation, I feel it's the same way. It's trying to get into that little gap before the thoughts.
Yeah.
It's the thought, the experience, and the thought, and just get into that gap and move on back to the breath.
Yeah. Your thoughts are always late to the game. By the time you've thought it, it's past. The experience always happens before thought. That's our term, precept, before concept, before conception. So getting to that perceptual place, is that a word? Perceptual. I just made that. Perceptive, how do you conjugate that? Is really what, the direct experience. Because by the time it's the experience, thought, words, it happens in that order. So by the time you think it's already past. By the time it becomes words, it's ancient history, and you're describing something that's been seconds ago. But it takes time. So just that direct experience before it becomes thought and judgment, and curse words. So is really where this is. That's what transcends me and me, is the direct experience. And there's really no way to express now in now, because just our nature is late, because we've developed this. I read this article where they gave the speech gene to a mouse, and they were and the whole effect it had on the mouse was really very interesting, because they chirped differently. So and it slowed their cognitive ability. They were just watching the mouse slow down, and also dopamine. So human beings, because we're speech oriented, this whatever this is that caused us, that evolved into speech, it's a more recent evolution, and it's late to the experience. So, and we see this now as we try to experiment with animals, we make them late to their own experience as well. So that direct experience, you can, it's, this now is, by the time it's from my brain to my mouth, was then, and not now. So it's that direct experience, impossible to really express, because just because of our nature, which is not a bad thing. We've done marvelous things with our abilities as human beings, but it's not the be all. Our magnificent brains are not the be all and end all of what we're capable of. We are still capable of that very direct, intimate, intuitive experience of reality. Brain is still there, and responding from that very basic place is also still there. So we're not trapped. We think we are. We think we unless we have encyclopedic explanations about everything, we can't do anything. But that's not true. We're not stuck in our brains, in our heads, because we're one with that experience, with everything. And that's our natural being. That's our natural way of being. That completely anonymity with that experience. When a mouse is hungry, it goes to find food. It doesn't have to talk about it to anybody, or find directions to the grocery store. That's that experience. But now that we're trying to make them talk, they don't know where to find food. It takes a little while to get there. Yeah.
I have a question. What is behind the need to describe our experience in our own thoughts or verbally?
Yeah.
And why do I need that? What's behind all of that? It seems that it comes from a source of fear and a search for security, or in other words, wanting to know. I don't need to know pain. I'm feeling pain right now.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I got to describe my pain. Was that from 1 to 10? Was that bad? Should I be telling the dentist back to F off?
Yeah.
Versus, I don't need to know that. It's pain. I'm going to sit here for another hour and let it finish.
Yeah. Sometimes. I mean, there's value in being able to talk and describe. And, there's, so I'm not saying one is good and one is bad. But it just isn't everything. So we tend to rely too much on our ability to cognate stuff. There's stuff and that's just slow for us. The immediacy is what we're talking about in this experience. Not that the conversations and the descriptions, because certainly we have generated volumes and volumes of amazing literature and beautiful poetry, and certainly being able to tell your doctor what's wrong helps them with the art of medicine, because medicine is an art. They rely on those descriptions to be able to try and help you, and it's they're guessing because they don't know. That's the mistake that people think is like, the doctor knows everything and should cure me. No, they're just going by what you say and making their best guess. Certainly they're educated to do that, but they're not gods. So all the talking and chattering is not wrong. It's not everything. It's not all that we're capable of.